good evening, and welcome to another developer interview for our Perceptive podcast series. For tonight, my guest is the co-founder of Huey Games, a studio that specializes in modern retro design and a lot of modern retro games. And they're currently working on the Kickstarter for their next title, Hyper Sentinel Fusion. And they're on to chat about that and anything else modern and retro involved. So, please welcome to the cast, Rob Hewsom. How are you doing today?
Yeah, hi Josh, I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I am doing alright. Busy here, it seems, despite being incredibly hot and rainy here on the East Coast. It's been a very wild June, and I think it's going to be a very wild July as well.
Oh, I know how you feel. I'm over here near to Manchester in the UK, and we've had everything. We've had rain, and now we've got a heat wave that's just finishing up. So, yeah, I know the feeling.
But it's great to have you on. Thanks again for reaching out about wanting to come on for these casts. As I was telling Rob before we started, I'm always looking for guests for this series. So if you are a developer working on a game or just want to chat about game dev and many of its facets, please get in touch. So, as we are chatting, you have just launched the Kickstarter for Hyper Sentinel. And for those of you watching this, by the time this cast goes up, it should be still going on. So, since this is your first time on, can you talk a little bit about who you are and what is Huey Games?
Yeah, sure. So, me personally, I've been in the games industry for 20 years now. Design background, so I've been a lead designer, I've been a game director at studios. I've worked on a bunch of Lego games. In fact, I've got some of my old Lego trophies in the corner here from the games that I worked on. So I was a game director on Lego games. And then, co-founder of Huey. We've been going for nearly 10 years now at Huey Games. And it's an interesting company. We do a lot of work for hire development and porting. So we've done porting for Konami on a couple of games, Deliver at All Costs and Signal All Guns Blazing. We've done porting for Devolver. We ported Inscription across to consoles, things like that, co-development. But we also do our own things. So we released Hyper Sentinel, the original, in 2018. This was a shoot-'em-up game, a sort of pure arcade shoot-'em-up game. And now we're doing a sequel, Hyper Sentinel Fusion. And we've kind of got a cool retro gaming heritage, at least over here in the UK and Europe. Actually, my dad ran a company called Hewson in the 1980s, which was a publisher, and published some hit games on sort of the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum. And so Hyper Sentinel and Hyper Sentinel Fusion kind of take inspiration from some of those older titles, which is pretty cool. So we've got a really nice kind of retro gaming community following what we do. And we're back with another Kickstarter, our 21st Kickstarter campaign.
Nice. And how long has Huey Games been in the foundation, or has been around for?
Huey Games is nearly 10 years old. January will be our 10th birthday. So yeah, we've been going for 10 years. Like I say, most of the business has been based on doing work for hire development. That's what sort of kept us going. But we love to do cool stuff for the retro community. As I say, we've done 20 successful Kickstarters before now, and all for the retro community. So we've done some retro gaming books. We've also done these collectible USB cassettes. So it's like a cassette tape with a USB stick that folds out, and we've licensed games onto there. So, for example, we did Dark Side Detective with Akupara Games as a physical edition on there, and a whole bunch of other titles like that. So that's just a cool, fun thing that we like to do, and it kind of ties in with our retro heritage. Like I say, going back to the early 80s.
Mm-hmm. And since for the audience that's going to watch it, so I know quite a few developers who have looked into porting, especially going from PC to console. Again, we could probably be here for a few hours just on this one topic alone. But what is kind of how is that war for your studio in terms of doing that specific job of bringing a PC game to console, or even vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, so we myself and John, my co-founder, we set up the company in 2016, and initially we didn't set it up to do porting. We were pitching some games, didn't work out, and we'd done some kickstarters for the retro audience, as I said. So that was kind of helping us to survive. And then we realised that John, he's our CTO. His technical background was something that we could sell, and we were getting some work for. And we did the original Hyper Sentinel in 2018, and we self-published it, and we ported it to all the consoles. And then we thought, well, now that we've ported our own game, maybe we can help some other indies to port their games. So we ported Switch and Shoot by Matt Glanville across to PS4 and Xbox. We ported The Mystery of Woolly Mountain, which is a point-and-click game by James Lightfoot. We ported Silk, which was a kind of tile-based adventure trading game, from Chris Bateman, who was the designer behind Discworld Noir, and that was just a kind of cool thing to do with the indie community, to port their games. And then I remember being at an event where I was talking to a publisher, and they were asking what we were up to, and I said, "Oh, we've been porting these games for indies," and they said, "Oh, well, we need somebody to port a game that we've signed. Do you want to pitch for it?" And that was kind of the light bulb moment where I was like, "Oh, hang on a minute, we can sell this as a service to publishers." And that really changed the business, because we discovered this business model, and we doubled down on that. And John was really smart about it. He said, what we're going to do is we're going to build technology, and he came up with the name Huey Core, and we're going to build this technology that makes the porting process efficient, more and more efficient, more and more turnkey. And we sort of branded this smart porting powered by Huey Core. And then we've built the business on that. We've gone, as I said, we've worked with Konami, Devolver, Marvelous Games. We've done several ports for Yogscast Games. We did Plate Up, a bunch of publishers that we've been able to kind of partner with and have as clients, doing this porting service and building up our Huey Core tech to make that porting as turnkey as possible, so that the compliance, which can be quite heavy on the consoles, we can get it running on the consoles quickly, and most of the compliance is kind of automated or handled out the box because of this tech that we've built up over the years. So that kind of became our business model, and that supports all of the other stuff that we like to do and have fun with, by making our own games and doing stuff on Kickstarter. And it kind of gives us that that kind of support, security, to be able to experiment without worrying about being able to pay the bills and at the same time.
And given the I guess the software that Huey Games has developed, does the game that comes to you, does that affect the difficulty, or has it become more the software can handle I guess any game or any genre that you need in terms of porting?
Yeah, so it does vary depending on the game. So optimization can still be quite a challenge, because every game is put together differently, and sometimes you look at a game and you think this will be no problem in terms of optimization, but then when you get under the hood, it's like, oh, okay, this really needs some work, just because of how things have been structured. And sometimes you look at a game and you think, oh, is this going to run at 30 frames on a particular console? and you're quite pleasantly surprised. So optimization can be a challenge, just because there's so much variety in the way that games can be put together. Mm-hmm. So that's still a challenge. And multiplayer as well. There's a lot more compliance that comes with games that have networking and online multiplayer, and it's difficult to capture in a kind of unified solution all the different ways that could be done. Is it server side? Is it peer to peer? Is it is this middleware? Does it use this middleware or that middleware? Is it a fast paced game or not? There's a lot of things that you have to do to comply on the console, so that can be more tricky. But what our software does, what Huey Core does, is it handles a lot of the things which are which can be automated or made more turnkey. So, for example, saving and loading, every game does saving and loading. But the way that saving loading has to work technically on Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox is different for each one of them. They have very specific different technical requirements of how it has to be handled. And we've created this really clever system within our Huey Core save manager, which kind of serializes the save load that the game's got and automatically maps that across how it has to work on each of those consoles. So it doesn't have to be kind of written bespokely each time. So we can do that for save and load. We can do that for we have an achievement and trophies manager. We can do it for activities. We can do it for there's all sorts of compliance that we have just got loads of tools and automation for. But there are still specific challenges from game to game once you kind of get under the hood and look at how many platforms they want. Does it have online multiplayer? Is optimization a challenge? If optimization a challenge, is it the lighting? Is it the number of polygons? Is texture size a problem for memory? So game development's hard, right? So you have to kind of get under the hood and see what's what.
And besides like porting games from like PC to console, since your studio's a lot with retro design, retro titles, do you do anything in terms of like porting or making sure like older games are compatible with modern PCs?
Not specifically. I think from a kind of design inspiration point of view for some of our own games, we have this neo-retro philosophy, which is taking inspiration from the past, but bringing it up to date with modern effects and modding, gameplay mechanics and so on. And which is what we're doing in Hyper Sentinel Fusion. It's got dynamic lighting, it's got procedurally generated levels, it's got kind of rogue light upgrade loops and so on. But it kind of gives you that rose-tinted impression of how you remember the older games being. But in terms of the conversion work, some of the games we've worked on have had pixel art visuals. Some of them have had incredible 3D. We take what comes our way, and we've been very lucky to work on some really big titles. We don't specifically work with older titles. We work mostly in the indie space with indie publishers.
Okay. So one question I always like to ask developers who work in the modern retro field is what kind of like attracted you to making or focusing on modern retro design?
Part of it, a big part of it, is the heritage. So when we started, I don't know if you can see this game here. So this is Uridium. It's on cassette. This game was published in 1986. There we go. There's the cassette tape. Uridium for Commodore 64. And you can see the publisher there is Hewsom. So Hewson is my surname, and obviously my dad's surname. And the publisher was called Hewson. He named it after his surname because, well, originally he'd been a consultant and he called it Hewson Consultants. And then he ended up writing books about computers, and then people ended up sending in his games. And he was, I guess I'm a publisher then. In the days, this is in 1981, before anyone knew what a video game publisher even was. And so, I remember playing Uridium, 1986. So I would have been about 5 years old. 4 or 5 years old. I remember playing Uridium and my dad pointing at the word Hewson on the title screen and teaching me how to spell my surname from the game's title screen. So, I'm very proud of that sort of heritage. And when we started the company, it's hard. It's really hard and risky starting a company. And you kind of think about, well, what cards, we're all dealt a hand in life, right? What cards have I got that I could play? And so we called the company Hewson to kind of say, look, we're bringing back this company from the 80s, and Dad's involved, and and it got us some press, and we leveraged that as you would. And then over time, we wanted to evolve the company, so it evolved to be called Huey. But really, a lot of the inspiration comes from that heritage. and comes from the fact that we've been able to build up a really amazing community of retro gamers who have helped us fund, as I said, 20 Kickstarter campaigns for all of our books and our cassettes and everything that we love to do. And they're just the best community out there. Super passionate, genuinely passionate, really supportive, and just cheering us on all the way. And so we love working with that community. It is a niche community, but it's a super passionate community. And so I think that's where kind of the inspiration comes from. And working with Jonathan Port of 456 Pixel, he was the lead developer on Hyper Sentinel and is also on Hyper Sentinel Fusion. So it's a collaboration with him, really helped, because he was actually working on this game, Hyper Sentinel, when we started the company. He'd already built a kind of prototype inspired by Uridium. So he was inspired by Uridium, and we kind of messaged him and said, hey, we're the kind of people who published that back in 1986. Do you want to do something cool together? We didn't have the IP, but we took inspiration from it. And so, yeah, it led us down this, as I said, this idea of doing neo-retro. Like, we want to do games in the indie space, modern games, but taking this inspiration from the past. And we have this idea that how you imagine the games were back in the day isn't always the same as when you pick them up and play them now. You might go, in your imagination, they were like, they were something else, but when you pick it up, you're like, oh, this is aged a bit. So we kind of wanted to say, now let's do the imagination version. So, for example, Hyper Sentinel Fusion, back in the day in Uridium, I always imagined, because you could land the ship in Uridium, and there's a little mini game, but always imagine, what if you could land the ship and then carry on the game inside the ship, take your robot inside or something like that. And that's what we're doing in Hyper Sentinel Fusion. So it's like the realization of that dream that we had in childhood.
Nice. I do like how you brought out a cassette that is 1 year younger than me for the cast.
There you go. I've got another one here, which is even older. So this is Paradroid, which is the other game that inspires the kind of interior part of Hyper Sentinel Fusion. You can see there, that one actually still says Hewson Consultants. So he hadn't dropped the consultant bit yet. So that was published in 1985. Both Paradroid and Paradroid and Uridium were developed by a guy called Andrew Braybrook, who's a kind of legendary programmer from back in the day over here. But it was much more regional back there. Like, the games that we had in the UK and Europe were not the same games as in North America or Japan. We didn't have this global world. So, it's really interesting. I love that. I love that there's our own history here, and there's a different. I can give you an example. People always talk about the crash of 1984, right? Mm-hmm. The ET cartridges buried in the desert. The whole industry crashed, and Nintendo came and rescued it. That history is the North American history. Yeah. It's not the case in the UK. In the UK, 1984, the industry was absolutely flying, and we were playing on the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64, and the industry didn't crash. We had all these amazing homegrown games, and so it's really interesting how there are these different histories, and so I don't know, when people talk about the history, it's like, well, there's different, and Japan, something else was going on, and and so on. So I just think it's really fascinating.
Mm-hmm, yep. I think it's so easy for people to kind of forget that, especially if you just started playing games like 10, 15 years ago, where we already have the likes of Steam, where you can download games from literally any developer from any corner of the world. But yeah, like, for us who grew up in the 80s or even into like the 90s, early 2000s, like, for a lot of us, like, at least here in the United States, like, we did not get like any of the majority of the games that were, exclusive to Japan, or of course exclusive to like the UK and that particular area. And it's always fascinating to like think about just how many games never really, I guess, like, kind of got their like foot off the ground because they were kind of only in their one localized area. And it's also kind of like what we saw in like the 2000s with kind of like how PC and console were like their own separate universes. Like, it really we didn't really see that trend get bucked until like maybe like early 2010s. Where now, these days releasing a game on PC and consoles day one was like, yeah, like that's normal. But for everyone remembers like in the older than that, it was like, yes, the game comes out for PC and then like 5 months later for console, or vice versa.
Or never at all. Yeah, absolutely. It's. I think it's really interesting, and and also with the regionality, we had different television standards. There was NTSC in North America and other places. There was PAL here and in Australia, and so it's really weird. Like in Australia, they had a lot of the same games that we have because the television standard was the same. And so they got shipped over there, but they didn't necessarily get shipped. It's really, I think it's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And with kind of like modern retro design in of itself, that's another aspect that I always find fascinating to talk about with developers, because we've interviewed here on this cast like developers who've done a lot of like modern retro games. There was a Skull, the Black Pirate, which is kind of like a Apple II, making a modern retro RPG based off the Apple II here. And of course, the many like adventure game developers that we've spoken with here on this channel. Like for the people listening, like we spoke to like I think like 10 different Davids who have done adventure games. And part of like this challenge, I know something I think you were kind of talking about a few minutes ago, is like the appeal of modern retro design. Like there are people like you and I, that I'm sure quite a people watching this cast, who grew up with these games. That if you mention a shmup, if you mention Flashback, Out of This World, any one of those games, their ears peak up. But for a lot of people, they've never heard of these games. They have no original love. Like I've said this before, one of my favorite games of all time is the original XCOM. It is a fantastic game, but I do not recommend anyone who didn't grow up playing that game to go back and look at it, because it's a very rough game just by the time that it was developed. So the question I want to ask you about with Hyper Sentinel and with the other titles from Huey is, what is kind of like the approach or your like philosophy when it comes to like, I guess like squaring that circle of, we want to make a modern retro game, something for someone who grew up 20, 30, 40 years ago, but we still want to make something that can appeal to someone who didn't have an original Commodore or never played a NES or SNES or that particular style.
Yeah, 100%, and that's where this kind of neo-retro philosophy, comes in. I think you want to tickle the nostalgia gland, or whatever it is, with the visuals, with the sounds, with that kind of getting the rose-tinted version of that memory, as I said before. But you want to make a game which feels modern, has the modern kind of game feel, and visual effects and lighting and explosions and doing stuff that's really slick and smooth and feels really nice to play. And I think it's really interesting because the retro aesthetic, it's a style. It's a style now. Back then it was what we had to work with. Pixels. That's what all you could do. You were limited by memory and so on and so forth. Now it's kind of a style and aesthetic. And I think the reason it appeals, it's not just part of it's the nostalgia for some people, but I think another reason that it appeals to people, perhaps younger people who don't have the nostalgia, is that it's abstract. And the thing about something that's abstract is it can be really powerful, because you can do stuff, you can do cool, dramatic, crazy stuff without having to kind of justify it in a realistic sense. You can just do it. And because it's abstract, the player's imagination fills in the gaps. And I think that's really powerful, especially for indie developers, to be able to say, if we do this in a kind of pixel art style, that means it's abstract. That means we can tell a story without having to worry about, the uncanny valley and perfect facial animation or whatever it is that you would have to worry about if you're doing it realistic. And I mean, if you look at this is a slightly different thing, but I think if you look at Nintendo games, you very rarely see realistic in quotation marks,
Mm-hmm.
visuals, because really getting something that feels good when you're doing something realistic is so much harder because of that uncanny valley. Like if you make beautifully realistic graphics, you notice that the animation doesn't look quite like it would in real life. But if you make it even just a little bit more abstract, you can just make it more playful and have so much more fun with it. And so I think you see that with the Nintendo games, and I think the pixel art aesthetic, as well as being a style, as well as being nostalgic, because it's abstract, allows you to do that kind of stuff. Allows you to do cool, funky, crazy, playful things that are just kind of more joyful, knowing that you don't have to justify it and knowing that the player's imagination can kind of fill in the blanks. And that's what we used to have to work with back in the day, our imagination. I mean, I remember playing Iridium and literally my sister and I drawing planets and stars on pieces of paper and taping them around the screen to make it like to extend the imagination of the game. And on the Commodore 64, remember the loading times of like 5 minutes to load on a cassette tape, and you had those kind of color bars going across the screen when you're loading. And my sister and I would pretend that we were flying. That was us flying through the sun. So you used your imagination as part of the experience. And so, I think there's something in that, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And like for myself, like for like people who play a lot of the old dungeon crawler games, like Wizardry, I played like A Train Odyssey back in the 2000s. Like you had like that level of like imagination because you just have like still images of characters walking around in a first person dungeon, so it lets your mind kind of wander in that respect.
Absolutely, and it's like the difference between reading a novel and watching a movie, right? When you read a novel, it comes to life in your mind, and I think when you play, a very stylized game or a very abstract game, it leaves that bit of space for you to do that in your imagination, and it just puts a smile on your face, I think. I think that's why this kind of modern retro games can be so appealing, even to people who don't have the nostalgia element.
Yep. And about like kind of like the appeal of modern retro design, I think this is another very interesting point that like for people like looking from the outside, I feel like there's still that sentiment that retro games are basic or they're very simple. That a 2D platformer can't possibly be as interesting to play as a fully 3D or explosive first person shooter. And then when we saw last year with the success of a UFO 50, but I really loved the package of that game and how we got these titles that were very much like advanced. Like they weren't advanced in this, as we were just saying, like there's no, 4K ray tracing, there's no hyper realistic. But despite the fact that they were designed to be something that could fit on a console in like 1980 or at most like 1991, there was some amazing gameplay in those titles.
Absolutely, and it's amazing what you can do when you design in an elegant way. I mean, look at Elite, right? The original Elite on the BBC. Look at Lords of Midnight, which Silk, one of the games that we ported and published, is kind of inspired by Lords of Midnight. But they get these huge worlds that okay, visually they don't look as incredibly detailed as an open world today, but nevertheless, people found a way with whatever it is, 16K of memory or 64K or whatever, to create these vast kind of interconnected systemic worlds. And I think I think and sometimes there's nothing more scary for a designer than a kind of blank canvas, because there's no constraints. When you impose constraints on a designer or an engineer, it forces you to think creatively. You're like, okay, these are the boundaries I've only got 6K of memory, so I can't do this. But what I'm going to do to get around it is do something really cool and creative. So you got your wireframe graphics in Elite, but you've got this incredible world that they figured out a way with those constraints. And so, I mean, creativity, I think, flourishes when you have constraints. And on old hardware, it was nothing but constraints. I remember going to a talk. I was in the audience for a talk about the ZX Spectrum, and some of the hardware guys were there, and some of the programmers, and they were talking about how they did this new version of the Spectrum, and I can't remember which iteration it was, but a new version of the Spectrum, and they started testing the games on it, and none of the games worked. And they're like, oh my God, what? But it's the same hardware. How can the games not work? And they brought in one of the developers of the game. And turns out there was physically on the circuit board a defect in the original Spectrum, like a physical circuit board defect. And they fixed it for the new Spectrum. And all of the developers were leveraging this defect to do some routine. I can't remember what it was. Maybe it's to do with how they were doing the scrolling in the games or something, but they managed to leverage. I'm not an engineer, so I can't remember the details. But they fixed this defect on the circuit board for the sequel, and none of the games worked anymore. And that's how things were back in the day. These engineers were going right down to the metal of the hardware and figuring out exploits in order to get a game working. And I've got another example. I'm sorry, I know I go on a bit, but there's a game called Nebulous. I think it came out in North America as Tower Toppler. It was Castellian in other territories. It had all sorts of different names and it was licensed out. But that was published originally by my dad's company as a game called Nebulous, where you climb a tower, and the tower looks like it rotates in 3D as you go around it. It was Tower Toppler in North America. But that came about because John Phillips, who I still talk to today on LinkedIn, the developer, he was just playing around with manipulating the character set on the Commodore 64, which is not normally you move sprites around on the screen, but he was like, no, I'm going to use the character set. And by manipulating the character set, he gave this impression of rotation of a cylinder, and it was just magical because it gives this 3D effect where normally you wouldn't get it. And it took them a while to figure out what the game was, and he had it horizontally at first and was talking to my dad about this effect, but I don't know how to put game in it. And then he turned it upright to be a tower, and they decided to make this game. But anyway, that game exists because he was just hacking, figuring out something cool he could do to exploit the character set in the hardware, not the expected thing, and it created this incredible game that people still remember today. So you had to be creative back then, and I think that's why those games are so exciting.
Yeah. And to bring us back to like the UFO 50 example, like the titles in them still dealt with the limitations or the imposed limitations of that particular era. So it's not a case, and I think this is something I always tell a lot of developers about trying to figure out what makes your game like unique and special, that it's not about, how much hardware you put into it. It's about what kind of gameplay is going to drive someone to check this one out. And
100%, yeah.
It's a lot harder than I think I just said for some developers to do that. You can't just, I think, rely on, the power of your hardware. As thunder is shaking my house, I'm saying this, so I guess the skies are agreeing with me on that one, to kind of sell a game anymore. And I think that's a very interesting question I want to ask you about with Huey Games and with like your lineup, that we really have seen like the market, at least from the outside, like shift in the past 15 years in terms of what consumers are expecting, especially what consumers are paying for. You, I'm sure, as any developer in the 2010s, lived through kind of like that particular era where people were only expecting like pay like $4.99 or $9.99 for an indie game, and that was it. And we've seen kind of the value of games going up, and in response, we've seen kind of people wanting more qualitative experiences. So, like for like yourself and for Huey Games, like how has like things been like for like your studio in terms of like the market over the past 15 years or 10
Yeah,
years since it was founded?
10 years since it's founded. Yeah, it's really it's difficult for me to answer because um, like I say, primarily Huey Games as a business has grown and be successful on working on other people's games, importing and co-development. That's where the vast majority of our income has come from. We've made Hyper Sentinel. We've put out some other. We've ported some other games for indie developers, but we've not had a huge hit on that front. We've made some money, but we make more money, frankly, from our porting and co-development service. That's what's kept us going and growing as a company. And so I don't have the insight that maybe other indie developers would have. But I mean, what I have seen is, in the before 2016, I was, as I said, I was a game director at TT Games, directing Lego games, and at that time, from sort of 2010 to maybe up to 2016, it seemed from the outside, I was working on AAA games, but it seemed from the outside that it was possible to put a game on Steam and make a decent chunk of change. And that discoverability wasn't as difficult because indie games were new and small, and Unity was one of the things that helped with this. Digital distribution was one of the things that made all this possible, but it was new. Now, of course, there's thousands of games released on Steam every year. Visibility is a massive challenge. The market is massively oversaturated. It's a maturing market, and at the same time, the way that we market games has completely changed. Magazines are dead. Websites are dying. It's the way that games are marketing has changed. So much has changed. So I think when we came in 2016, I mean, we've been very fortunate in a lot of ways, and I'm grateful for all the success that we've had as a company and going for 10 years. But in terms of trying to be an indie developer, 2016 was kind of the back end of when it was easier to get funding, and it's just got harder and harder and harder since then, I think, to get funding and to find success on Steam because of this. Maybe that's me kind of letting myself off the hook a bit for for not being able to sort of for the fact that we went down the route of being a service business and haven't had a kind of hit game of our own yet. But we made the decision that that was the way. That we're quite a conservative, cautious bunch. I wasn't going to put, my house or anybody else's house on the line to roll the dice on a game. It's just not realistic for us. And so the alternative is build a service business, and then you can put those profits back into the odd bet, like we've done with Hyper Sentinel Fusion, and we've been very fortunate to get some funding for Hyper Sentinel Fusion from the UK Games Fund, who are absolutely brilliant. And now we've got this Kickstarter, so we're able to have some fun and make our little games. But getting a hit, I don't know how to do that. I haven't done it yet as an indie developer. I don't know. I think the market has changed dramatically in the way I've described, but I guess I feel like more of an observer of that than a participant to some extent.
And so much of the market has really changed in the past 10 years in terms of, I guess, like how we've seen more games being released, how they're being marketed. And there was that kind of like that period, like I was saying, like if we talk about like mid 2010s, I think following like the success of Shovel Knight and Yacht Club, that a lot of developers tried to like jump on like that modern retro style of design. And like even like on my Steam list, like today, I was seeing people who picked up like games that look like from the Commodore, from the ZX Spectrum, from many of those other designs. And there's this tendency from I think developers to think that when we talk about modern retro, we just mean make a game like 1983, make a game like 1991, and call it a day. That's all you need to do. But there's a big difference, I think, between games that kind of like capture like that spark of being a retro title, but still being appealing. So I wanted to ask you, like, in your opinion, what do you think is like the biggest misstep that you can have thinking about making a modern retro title or modern retroly designed title?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I completely agree with you. I think it you know if you want to make a retro game, like a game that's like a game from the 80s or the 90s or whatever it is that you're targeting, cool, you can do that, and maybe you can even make it. I know people who make games for the old systems, who make games for the Spectrum Next or for the Commodore 64 or for the Amiga. And that's cool as a hobby, but I think commercially it's difficult to have a success with that kind of thing. Um, Modern retro or neo retro or whatever you want to call
Mhm.
it is taking inspiration, kind of leveraging a nostalgia, and b that the power of the abstract, as we sort of talked about earlier, to make a game, to actually make a modern game. So the retro comes from maybe the look or the spark or the inspiration, um, uh, and it gives you that ability to be abstract, but actually the design
Mhm.
is the modern part.
Yep.
And if you're going to have a successful modern game, you have to come at it from that perspective. So I think, um, you know, look at it in that way. Don't look at it in, I'm going to copy this retro game, because it's unlikely to cut it with a modern audience. So I think that would be the kind of biggest misstep, as you talked about. I think, for example, Hyper Sentinel Fusion. If you look at a screenshot of it, you might think, oh, it kind of looks like a 16-bit Amiga game. Actually, if you put it side by side, it looks a lot nicer, but your brain thinks it might look like a 16-bit Amiga game. But when you play it, it's got procedurally generated levels. It's got explosive particle effects going all over the screen. It's using way more colors, way more memory. It's got rogue-like type upgrade loops, so you're collecting currencies, and then when you die, you're spending them on upgrades. It's got the controls and the game feel of modern games. It's got and you have to take it from that perspective. I think that's what neo retro, modern retro is about. It's about taking inspiration, style, essence from the past,
Mhm.
using that to be able to do stuff in an abstract way. But actually, it's modern design, modern game, and I think that's how you have to approach it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. When I spoke with some like other like modern developers, I think one thing that they said I thought was also very poignant was yes, our game was meant to like look like a game that was made in 1994, 1991, whatever. But we also approached on this idea of what if this console kept going? What if people were still making games in it 5, 10 years after the fact? How would a more evolved version of this platform look in that time? And like to your point about that while the look of the game may be retro, but the design must be modern or neo. Like that, I think is another really good point about that. That you can't just think, okay, I'm gonna make a game that looks and plays exactly like something from 1983, 1991. Why aren't people buying it today? Well, if someone didn't grow up playing games in 1991, they don't have a frame of reference, or they don't even understand, why should I be looking at it? And it's a lot harder, I think, than people give credit for making a good modern retro game, or one that can sell in today's market.
Yeah, it's hugely challenging because I think we don't have the constraints in terms of the hardware anymore, in terms of memory and all the rest of it. But the complexity and the sophistication that you have to get to with a modern game, the level's really high if you want to have success. You have to be, you have to add, you have to iterate and iterate and iterate and add polish on top of polish on top of polish, and sophistication on top of sophistication. You have to have really elegant systems. You have to play test and play test and play test. And games are complicated. It's you can't kind of, there's no two ways about it. Game development is challenging, incredibly difficult and complex for different reasons today than perhaps in the past. Because you can do so much now, you're not constrained by the limitations of the hardware as much. Then you have to do more, in a sense. You have to, to compete with the modern kind of games. You have to do more, and so you have to be much more sophisticated. So it's an interesting challenge. It's an interesting kind of distinction between the style and the substance of a modern retro game.
Yeah, and trying to get like that appeal right when it comes to like a modern retro game, like that's the other part that I think is very interesting, because as you've been talking about Hyper Sentinel, with it borrowing elements from like roguelike and roguelite design, that we look at kind of like older consoles or like older games, we had kind of like the inklings of like those kinds of elements, and we talk about like the original Rogues, NetHack, Rogue, and so on. Like, of course, they would become the foundation for many of the roguelikes that we would see today. With kind of like looking at like old school design or modern retro and like trying to bridge that gap, what's kind of like the process of, I guess, like how much we want to like really like push what you could do with like these older consoles or this older style?
I mean, in terms of the process of development, do you mean the process that we go through? So for us, we're very iterative. So Jonathan Port, 456 Pixel, initially built what he wanted to do as a sequel to Hyper Sentinel. And myself and Pete Gomer, our head of design, went to see Jonathan and look at what he built. And we just sat down and talked about, okay, this is fantastic. Where can we take this? And Pete was very keen on the idea of bringing in roguelite elements. And there was just this thing about, okay, back in the day when you played shoot 'em ups in the arcade, you'd die and you'd put a quarter in, and that's cool. But actually, that kind of works quite well for having this idea of dying and then spending your currency on upgrades. So instead of dying and putting a quarter in, you're dying and you got this currency spent. That fits. That's kind of cool. There's something to that, and we all felt there was something to that. And again, Pete, I think, sort of said, I always wanted to land the ship and get out. And I said, and then I sort of said, well, yeah, Jonathan, wouldn't it be cool if we could land the ship and then you go inside and it's like Paradroid, because I know our community loves Paradroid. It's like one of their biggest things. That would be so cool if we could do that. And Jonathan's like, yeah, I think I can do something like that. And so he went away and just built that. And then like, cool, he brought it back together, and then we looked at it, and we just have this really iterative process of saying, right, this isn't working, this isn't quite fit together. How do we make that whole loop work? How do we make the droids control? Fine tune, iterate. Just tight feedback cycles. That's how we like to work. Until the point that we're kind of like, okay, we can feel that this is getting there now. Now let's go to the next level of iteration and bring in our community. So we went to our retro community from all our Kickstarters and what have you, invited them to a Discord server, and we started play testing. And we use a platform called Go Testify, which is a great platform for play testing. I would recommend to anybody. And you get a certain number of free hours per month on Go Testify, and you give people the link, and they get the build. And what it does is it records their screen, it records their microphone. They can talk to you about their experience of the game, and it can give you some really intelligent insights into that. And so we then worked with our community, and we've done, I think, since December, I think we've done 5, so 1 per month, 5 builds. And we've got their feedback. We've looked at their surveys. We've looked at their videos. Fine tune. The things that you as a developer think are obvious never are. You get player to play it, and you're like, oh my god, how can you not see that you're supposed to go this way, or that your health's there? And of course, it makes sense in hindsight, but you need to get it in front of players and get that feedback. So we refined the onboarding, refined the signposting. We kept adding all the bits to the gameplay loop. We got feedback on how the weapon drops work, worked with our community. And so we're very iterative. That's how we like to do it. And now we're at 1.6, which is the demo, which is now up on Steam, so anyone can go and play it, which is the Kickstarter demo. And we're really happy that we have got a really tight loop. The game feel is beautiful. The controls are beautiful. The onboarding's been refined. Yeah, there's still stuff to add in terms of content, but we feel like we've got to a really good place with the loop. So that's our process. It's very, very iterative. It's not like a design document, go and make that. It's kind of like that process of refinement. And just when you think you've refined everything, there's another layer and another layer and so on.
And as you're saying, with Sentinel Fusion being built off of Hyper Sentinel and having the inspiration from the other games, that you had this kind of a background or this kind of foundation to build off of with the sequel. And with kind of developing Hyper Sentinel Fusion, going from the first one to the second one, what else was it like? I guess I think about like how to expand on this game, because that's, I think, another aspect of modern retro games. I've seen some developers fall into that trap of, well, we're just going to make like the same game. We're just going to repeat like the same level design. Maybe instead of a blue sky, now it's a orange sky, but it's still like that same exact element. And like we were saying earlier, like, you have to do like more if you're expecting someone today to be interested in a title like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's for us. It started from the point of view of Hyper Sentinel. The original was kind of meant to be like 8-bit. It looks like it's inspired by the 8-bit games, and it plays like that. It's kind of got that look and feel to it. And so the first jumping off point was, what if we go 16-bit with the style for Hyper Sentinel? And that's what Jonathan did initially. And he, a much wider play area, 16-bit style graphics, again, on steroids, and he built the procedural generation in there as well, because that was another cool thing that we thought would be, we wanted to get in there. So that was kind of the starting point, was to say, okay, what's the kind of foundation that takes this to the next level? And for us, it was that. It's the kind of like, imagine, if that was like, imagine if 8-bit had continued, Hyper Sentinel, then imagine if 16-bit had continued, and it looks like this, it's got these effects, and it's got procedural generation. And then we kind of folded in these extra layers to it. I think the other thing to say is, when you take inspiration from retro games, like we've taken inspiration from Iridium and Paradroid in particular, but also other retro games, that doesn't mean replicate them. It doesn't mean do what they did, because you have to make design decisions in service of the game that you're making, not as a clone of an old game. Otherwise, you're just making a clone of an old game. So, you know, in the original Iridium, you crash into buildings. In ours, you fly over them, because that doesn't work for us. In the original Paradroid, you're kind of got like these hacking it's different. It takes inspiration. Like, some of the fundamentals that work for our game are there, but it's a different experience, and you always need to make decisions in service of where the experience is taking you, where your game is telling you it wants to go, and not be like, oh well, no, because in the game, in these older games they did this, therefore I've got to stick to that. No, you've got to make decisions in the service of the game that you want to make, but also where the game's telling you it wants to go. And when you work on a lot of games, you get a feel for, the game is telling me where it wants to go, and I've got to kind of let it take me in that direction. And we'd have debates and discussions between us. And I think, and I've worked with Pete for a long time, known Pete for 20 odd years. And I've worked with him at TT. He was also a game director on Lego games. We've worked together over loads of games. And I worked with Jonathan on the original Hyper Sentinel. And we talk to each other, and we might have disagreements about things. But the way we approach that is like, cool, we've got a disagreement. Let's bounce this back and forth. Talk about why I think this, why you think that, bat it back and forth. And actually, what ends up happening is you find the third option, which is the correct, which is where it needs to go. It's not what my opinion was. It's not what Pete's or what Jonathan's was. It's like, but it takes account of why I had this opinion and why he had that opinion. And we bounce it back and forth until we're like, no, this is the solution. It solves the problem that I had. It takes the idea that he had, and it comes up with something better. And I just love that collaborative process. I think you've got to kind of bounce it back and forth and let that happen. I've never been a kind of auteur kind of approach to things. It's always bounce it back and forth. Explain the root of. Sometimes it's just a feeling. I'm like, I got this feeling, I don't like it, and then you have to kind of dig into, why do I feel this? Why do I feel this? And I sit here saying, why do I feel this, Pete? No, I know you're disagreeing with me, and everything you're saying makes sense, but why have I got this feeling? And it's like, I tell you what it is. It's because of A, B, and C, and this is what's bugging me. And when you get to the root of it, you bounce back, and then you come to a better decision, and ultimately it moves the thing forward. I'm rambling. I'm sorry. That makes some kind of sense.
Yeah. And again, like we were saying, when you're approaching a modern retro game, modern retro design, it's not just about being stuck in that period. It's about that iterative process. And especially about like the fans. And as you said, like Huey Games has been doing numerous Kickstarters for your games, Hyper Sentinel Fusion being the latest one. I guess in that respect, in terms of approaching Kickstarter and crowdfunding with these kinds of games, what has been like your approach or strategy to kind of like, I guess, like show the appeal of like modern retro design?
Yeah, I mean, Kickstarter's really interesting. I think we always try to respect the community, and we always try to bring them something when we're ready to show it. So that we've got it to a place where it's showing them what we want to do. So if we show it too early, then you can't have 1,000 people designing the game, right? It has to come from us to begin with. So when we get it to the point, like with Hyper Sentinel, okay, guys, this is our vision. This is what we want to do. Now, can you help us refine this? And can you give us feedback? And we will work with you. We will respect and discuss with you. If you suggest something that doesn't fit, we'll try and explain why it doesn't fit with what we're trying to do or what our thinking is, and we'll have that back and forth discussion. But I think we try to take it to that audience at that point where it's developed enough where we can show this is what we're going for, and we want to refine with you guys, and that's always worked with us. Kickstarter itself, I think, I'm doing a talk at Develop Brighton conference next week about Kickstarter and about lessons from Kickstarter, and the way we've approached it is to build an audience over time. So we've done a lot of small campaigns, and each time you add some more people to your followers on Kickstarter. We've done these cassettes, we've done these books, we get the books out to them, and we build up that audience so that the next time we can do maybe raise a little bit more, next time we can maybe raise a little bit more, and we can kind of feel our way forward on what does our community like. Our community likes to have physical products. They like cassettes, they like books. Here, have something new. It's the floppy disk USB edition, which is what we're doing for Hyper Sentinel Fusion for the first time. It's a floppy disk, and when you slide it back, a USB folds out. That's the box and PC edition. It comes with a manual, because we know that our community loves that, because we've done these 20 Kickstarters with them. Once you have those followers, you get kind of pre-launch followers on your Kickstarter page, which is almost like a wish list, and you can kind of work out roughly where the campaign's going from that number, and then they get alerts when the campaign launches. I think Kickstarter is like I say, I've got a whole talk I could do about that as a different subject, but I think it's that taking it to the audience when it's ready to be shown to them, and then working with them, respecting them, and explaining to them what you're trying to do as you go along. That's really worked for us, and we're very fortunate to have a wonderful community who are very supportive and understanding. But you've got to communicate with them.
Mm-hmm. And with the physical goods side of like the floppy disk, the USB drive, and of course boxes and all that, does Huey Games do you do that internally, or do you go to a manufacturer to get that going?
So in terms of manufacturing, we have somebody we work with who manufacture and print the cassettes and the floppy disks, and print the labels on them and put the files on them for us, and then they send them to us. On many of the campaigns in the past, I personally have shipped them from my home. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of boxing. You would not believe how much time it takes, even for 100 backers, to box up 100 cassettes, get 100 labels printed, take them to the post office. I've done it. I've done it for books. These days we have a distributor that we work with who does that for us. So we order the books or the cassettes. They go directly to the distributor. We give them the list. They pack them and send them out. Saves me a lot of pain and hassle in my house. We do use a distributor now. But I would not necessarily recommend to people to do physical rewards on Kickstarter, by the way, unless it's really important to your audience. In our case, it's really important to our core audience. If it's not important to your core audience, don't do it. And if you do have to do it because it is important to your audience, really think carefully about, okay, how big is this thing? How much does it weigh? What's the packaging? And try and keep it restricted. So, if you've got 100 of the same thing to send out and it's small and you know what the packaging is, that's one thing. But if you've got 100 of this, and then 10 t-shirts, and then 10 caps, and then nightmare, don't do that. So you have to think very carefully about that. So only do physical if your audience demands it, and if your audience does demand it, just think very carefully about how you're going to manage all of that.
Yeah, and with like the topic of physical goods, again, like I've done like very light stuff. Like I send like books to some of the fans. I made these little like treasure chest boxes. So and only doing like 3 or 4 of those, it was certainly a pain to go through international shipping and making sure everything was properly organized. So I can relate to that at least on the small scale.
Yeah, 100%. And it got a lot harder after Brexit here. Like shipping to
Hmm.
Europe became harder than shipping to anywhere else in the world, which is ironic considering we're in Europe. But anyway, that's another subject altogether. Yes, the very yes, it's a lot of work.
Hmm. So with Hyper Sentinel Fusion and doing the Kickstarter, as we've been saying for the people listening, the Kickstarter is currently active as we're recording this now. Do you have, I guess, like, if it succeeds, do you have an estimated release date for when the game is coming out?
Yeah, so we are aiming for the full release across PC and consoles in July next year, so July 26th. But we're going to do there's options on the Kickstarter to get on the beta program, so you can get you can play the demo right now, but you can also get access to the betas that we're going to do throughout development. We're looking potentially at early access as well. In the moment, we're self-publishing, so that's currently the roadmap that we've got in mind. And the early access, maybe it'll be towards the end of this year, maybe it'll be early next year. We'll see where we get to with that. But the target is July next year. We want to give ourselves enough runway to make sure we deliver for fans and make the game as good as it can be. But that's what we've got in mind.
And with, like, the games that you develop for Huey, like, since you go with, like, the Mono Roger approach, you go to Kickstarter and kind of use that as a way of building your fan base and engagement. For people listening to us, any other, like, tips or suggestions you have in terms of, I guess, like, reaching out to people, like, for projects like this?
Yeah, I mean, one thing about Kickstarter, I mean, first of all, I would say look at Thomas Bidot's talk at GDC this year. Absolutely brilliant if you're interested in Kickstarter. And one of the things he talks about, and one of the things that we've found in our experience is Kickstarter is not the place you go to find your audience. You have to bring your audience to Kickstarter. If you go to Kickstarter to find an audience, you're probably not going to have much luck. Kickstarter is actually really for amplifying the audience that you've already got and building the audience you've already got. And so I think if you have a community, if you have an audience, great, go and do a Kickstarter. If you're looking to build an audience, maybe wait until you've got a bit of an audience before you go and do your Kickstarter. But the other thing I would say as a kind of caveat to that is you can do a small Kickstarter. I'm sitting here having done 20 Kickstarters, and some of them were small amounts. And we've built the audience that way. So I don't know, if you know that you want to make a game in this particular genre, could you do a little Kickstarter for a little magazine or book about games of that genre? Or could you do some little, you're going to make a show about games of that genre? I don't know, something small that you're asking for a small amount of money for. And then if you can find a small audience and bring them to that Kickstarter and then deliver on it, then they grow a bit and go from there. So that's this kind of micro crowdfunding approach that we've leveraged. Takes a long time, potentially. 20 Kickstarters. We've our first one was in 2013. So there you go, 12 years of Kickstarters. But the other thing I would say is think about your audience. If you've got an audience of people who are interested in your genre of game, let's say you're making a platform game. If you've got a large audience of people who are interested in platform games, probably you've got a large audience of people who might buy your platform game when it's released. Might. But they're only interested, so they might not. If you've got an audience of people who are passionate about platformer games, then they probably will buy your platformer game when it's released. But what you're asking for is to people to give you money now for a platformer game that you're going to release in a year or two. So you don't want people who are interested. You don't necessarily even want people who are passionate about platformer games. You want to find those fanatics about platformer games who will give you money now for a game you're going to release in a year or two, because they have to make this thing exist, because they're fanatical about it. And it's much better to have a handful of those fanatics on Kickstarter than it is to have a whole load of people who are merely interested, because they're not going to give you money yet. And so try and find that small audience who are fanatics, maybe do a small Kickstarter in the area that you want to and build from there. That's one way of looking at it.
And to your point about having to bring the community to Kickstarter versus using Kickstarter to build a community, that I think is another very important point for developers listening. Because I've seen a lot of developers struggle with this, that they don't do any marketing. There's nothing before the Kickstarter that's done to get people excited about it. And then they just show up one day, okay, here's our Kickstarter. No one knows about it. No one donates to it. There's no support. And they're just kind of left scratching their heads.
Yeah, exactly. It's that thing, like I say, Kickstarter's not really for kickstarting, it's for amplifying. And once you kind of realize that, because now what you can do is you can get a coming soon page up on Kickstarter quite easily, actually. Like, don't think that you have to get your whole campaign ready to get it reviewed to get a coming soon page. You have to tick the boxes, a bit like on the Steam checklist. You have to tick the boxes to get your store page reviewed, but it's quite simple to do. And then you can get a coming soon page up, and then you can start getting followers on your Kickstarter. And when you start getting followers on your Kickstarter, those are people by definition who have a Kickstarter account, because you can't follow something without signing up with a Kickstarter account. Therefore, they're valuable people to have, and that's like a wish list. And if you can get a certain number of followers, and you can figure out what your average pledge level is going to be, because you're going to structure your rewards like this other Kickstarter campaign, and you can figure out how those followers convert, and again, watch Thomas's talk about the figures for how that convert, then you can get an idea of how much you can raise. And so you can kind of use that follower account, and you can say, okay, I need to get this many followers to be confident of raising this much money. And so you don't launch a Kickstarter until you have that checked off. And you want to be, statistically, you want to be getting 20% to 50% funded, at least 20% funded in the first 48 hours to be on track to get funded. So just do your research and use that coming soon page to get followers. Don't launch your campaign until you've got enough followers for those statistics to make sense. And you can build in that way.
Yeah, really good points about, again, like that challenge of getting or converting people into being potential fans and getting them interested in it. And like as you said, with all the Kickstarters that Huey Games has done, you've built up a respectable fan base of people who want to see your game succeed, who want to see, what else comes next from the studio. And it's that kind of that challenge. I'm like, to begin to wrap things up, one of the questions I want to ask you about, with the studio being about 10 years old now, what has it been like, I guess, like building support over the decade? Because this is, I think, another thing for a lot of like first-time developers or newcomers. They tend to struggle with this notion of, I guess, like becoming like a brand or having having consumers support your studio beyond just, we really like one game and that's all we really care about.
Yeah, so it's interesting for us because, like I say, the primary part of the business has been as a developer for hire. On the one hand, we've been focused on building our brand among indie publishers so that people come to us when they want porting, and we've been very successful in that with our sort of smart porting powered by Huey core. Certainly in the UK industry, a lot of the publishers here know who we are, and if they need porting, our name's going to be on that list. We're on the Nintendo's official list of porting providers for the Switch and so on and so forth. So we've had to really focus on building a brand on that side, because that's the backbone of the business that keeps us going for 10 years. In terms of delivering, working on our original games and Hyper Sentinel Fusion and the retro stuff we do, that has that has primarily been through these Kickstarter projects, and just keeping that going, respecting the community, delivering on each Kickstarter, and building that audience over time to leverage on. I'm not, we have a wonderfully passionate community, those fanatics that I talked about before. It's a small niche community, but they're just the best, and we love them, and we work with them, and we value them, because without them, Hyper Sentinel Fusion, Hyper Sentinel, can't come out and can't make money. The backbone of the business might be the service, but the heart of the business is in making games for people, the original Hyper Sentinel didn't make us millions and millions, but it was profitable, and it's because of those people that support us. So it's really, I think it's just really important to respect your community, to understand your community, to understand what they're fanatical about, and to value them, even if they're small. Almost, it's not about the size of the audience, it's about their passion and their fanaticism, and servicing that, because that is something you can build on. And I've already explained why on Kickstarter you can build on that. So I don't know, I think if you respect the passion of your audience over its size, then I think you're in a good place, and you've got something to build on. And then, maybe one day it breaks out into a bigger thing. But I don't know. These days, I think predicting the next hit is very difficult. Very difficult. And you talk to publishers, and they don't back things that they think are going to be hits anymore. They look for data. They look for wish lists. They look for some other kind of leverage, whatever their data is that they use, because nobody really can tell what's going to be a hit anymore. We don't have that. Those days are gone. You have to have data. And so I think, predicting when one of your games is going to break out is very difficult, but respecting and serving the passions of your audience, even if it's a smaller audience, is a critical starting point.
Mm-hmm. I have to ask, as you said, with your audience really loving physical goods, what's the favorite physical good that they want to see out of your Kickstarters?
So that's really interesting. So I think on the one hand, our biggest Kickstarters have been our books. So I'm going to hold some up now. So this is Houston's Helpline for the ZX Spectrum. So this is one of the books we did. This was actually, I talked about my dad earlier. He wrote a Spectrum column in every issue of Sinclair User Magazine. Anyway, those are all those columns put into a book, and people love that. That was one of our biggest Kickstarter campaigns. I don't think I've got any of the cassettes, the USB cassettes with me, but people really loved the cassettes because they're numbered, and they can put them in their collection alongside maybe their Hewson original Commodore 64 cassettes. So you can put the Hyper Sentinel cassette next to the 1986 Iridium cassette, and it's in your collection. So people really love those, and that's basically what we've done. We've done books, we've done some original games with Hyper Sentinel and Silk, which Hyper Sentinels, we've done physical, proper modern PS4 and Switch releases of it as well. But books, USB cassettes, the games themselves, and now for the first time, the 3.5-inch mega floppy micro drive, we're calling it for fun, which is the floppy USB version with the instruction book that we're doing for Hyper Sentinel Fusion. So yeah, those are the kind of fun things that our audience love to collect and put in their kind of rooms where they've got all their kind of retro machines and retro games and what have you. And also we do signed certificates, we do verification cards and things like that. And I think just those collectibles people love to have to authenticate that this is the original collector's edition from the Kickstarter. So that's what our audience really enjoys.
All right. So with that, we are probably over an hour in. As for people who've been listening to us, it has been thundering something else here during our chat. So I think we'll wrap things up here for now, unless I attempt fate anymore. But Rob, if you're free in the future, come back on. I would love to chat more about modern retro design, especially more about kind of like the challenges of like porting games.
Absolutely, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I hope that thunderstorm doesn't get too severe for you there.
So yeah, no problem. Before we wrap things up, any final points about Hyper Sentinel Fusion that you would like to mention in terms of like the design, development, or even just like making something like modern retro?
Yeah, Hyper Sentinel Fusion sales pitch is: imagine your favorite arcade shoot 'em up games married with Hades, and fuse those two things together. That's kind of like our vision for Hyper Sentinel. We think it's really unique. The handling of the ship is unique. The droid sections are unique. It's got that wonderful roguelite loop. It's got a hub world that you can go and explore. It's got Moonbase Alpha where you can go and talk to characters and purchase upgrades and look at your ship from the outside. So it's got that kind of structure to the metagame. There is a demo on Steam right now. Go to the Hyper Sentinel Fusion demo page, play it on your Steam Deck, play it on itch.io if you prefer. And yeah, please do check out the Kickstarter. It's coming out on PlayStation, on Xbox, on Nintendo, on PC, on Mac. And you can get the digital version. You can get yourself in the lore of the game on the Kickstarter. And of course, you can get the 3.5-inch floppy disk USB if you love physical games. You want to fight the good fight of keeping physical games alive. So yeah, please do check it out, and we appreciate all the support we can get.
All right, and definitely best of luck to you and to Huey for the Kickstarter.
Thank you very much.
I guess as one final point before we go into like our wrap up, I'm trying to think how I want to phrase this. One second, because the rain is distracting me. All right. I guess one final question then before we kind of go into our final wrap up. Then, do you have any idea of like what you'll be working on next following Hyper Sentinel, or is it still too early?
Oh, yes, I have a couple of ideas. Nothing that we can talk about yet. There's some cool ideas in the neo retro space that we'd love to work on. There's some massive things that if we get the opportunity, we'd love to work on. But yeah, nothing I can really talk about yet. But if you like the neo retro space, follow what we do. If you like modern retro, follow what we do. You know, there'll be more of it in the future, I have no doubt. And yeah, nothing I can really talk about just yet beyond Hyper Sentinel, but that's going to keep us busy for a while.
All right. And for people who want to follow you and Huey, do you have any social media you would like to mention? Twitter, Facebook, X, whatever.
Yeah, Huey Games is on Blue Sky. We're on Twitter, X, whatever it's called these days. Come and follow us there. We do have a Discord group as well for Hyper Sentinel Fusion, so come and chat and hang out. We'd love to get your feedback on the game. Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. And I guess finally, do you have anything you'd like to say to the fans watching to take us out for today?
Just a massive thank you. I've always, my dad always said to me, the only people who matter in the games industry are the players, because they're the only ones spending their own money on making it all possible. So just a massive thank you to all gamers, because the whole industry only exists because you keep spending money on games. And in particular, in our kind of audience, thank you for not just, putting your money down to support us, but all of your amazing feedback and your passion and working with us and communicating with us. It really means a lot to us. So just a massive thank you, really.
All right. So, with that, we will wrap things up here. As Rob said, the demo is currently available on Steam as well as the Kickstarter, so you'll find links to both down below. So be sure to check them out. And as I said earlier, again, thank you so much for coming on, and best of luck with the Kickstarter.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh. It's been my pleasure.
All right. So for people watching this, hope you're enjoying this cast on a day that is not thundering and flooding outside your window. And if it is, then be sure to stay indoors. As we said at the start, if you're a developer working on an upcoming game or just want to talk game dev, please reach out in all the many different ways. I'm always happy. Be sure to do the YouTubing stuff. Check out all the many copies of my books. Buy them all, whether they're modern, retro, or whatnot. And with that, be sure to come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where you some of the art and science of games. And until our next chat, have a great night.